The Titanic disaster has long held secrets. In a small university town in New England, James Miller, a history professor, delved into the study of early 20th century disasters. His interest in the Titanic was sparked after discovering several personal letters from survivors stored in the university archives. Inspired, James decided to dedicate his next project to the personal stories of those who lived through the famous catastrophe. In the course of his research, James learned about Rose Dawson, one of the last living survivors, residing in a small coastal town in Massachusetts. He organized a trip to meet her personally and record her memories. Upon arriving in the town, James discovered Rose's ancient home, hidden behind centuries-old oaks and a high iron fence. The house looked like a relic of time, its facade covered in ivy and its windows facing the sea, like eternal witnesses of the past. Rose greeted James at the gates of her home. She was an elegant woman with gray hair neatly tied in a bun. Her demeanor exuded grace and calmness. After a brief introduction of his intentions, James was invited inside. Inside the house, an atmosphere of antiquity prevailed. Soft carpets, heavy curtains, and Victorian-style furniture created a sense of immersion in another era. Rose led him to the library, where among the shelves of books hung a portrait of a young man drawn in charcoal. James couldn't take his eyes off this work. "That's Jack," Rose began, noticing his interest. "He was an artist aboard the Titanic. We met on the first day of the cruise. I was engaged to another, but Jack showed me what it means to truly live." Rose recounted her first evening on the Titanic, when she left the first-class dinner to escape her confining world, and how she met Jack on the deck. He offered to draw her portrait, which marked the beginning of their brief yet vivid love story. "Jack taught me to see the world through the eyes of an artist, to find beauty in the mundane, and it changed my life," she continued. Rose described how they danced among the third-class passengers who laughed and enjoyed the moment, unconcerned with social differences. James recorded every word, realizing that these memories were a priceless contribution to history. Rose's stories provided him not only with facts about the Titanic, but also with an understanding of the human emotions and experiences tied to this tragedy. As the conversation progressed, Rose seemed to journey back to her younger days, turning the pages of memories she hadn't stirred in a long time. Recalling her walks on the Titanic with Jack, she shared with James a story known to few. "One evening," she began, "Jack decided to show me the ship, not as most first-class passengers saw it. We descended into the engine room. Jack wanted me to see the true heart of the Titanic, its powerful engines that kept this giant afloat." As they walked through the narrow metal corridors, the dull thuds and clanging of machinery reached Rose. It was noisy, hot, and probably not entirely safe for a lady from first class, she noted with a smile. But Jack knew one of the mechanics, and he allowed us to stay and watch. Standing next to one of the massive boilers, a mechanic named Tom shared his concerns with them. He revealed that the pressure in the boilers often exceeded safe levels. "It was our little secret," Tom explained. "Most of us mechanics knew that the Titanic was sailing at the limit of its capabilities, but orders are orders, and we had to keep up the speed." Rose remembered feeling a chill of realization that such a powerful and beautiful creation, like the Titanic, could be so vulnerable. Jack grabbed my hand, and we silently watched the metallic beast, trying to understand if we were truly in danger, she continued. That night made me see the ship differently. I no longer saw it as an indestructible fortress, Rose concluded with a heavy voice. Her memories of those moments were filled not only with admiration for engineering artistry, but also with deep concern for the fates of all on board. James listened intently, realizing that each fragment of her narrative added new shades to the overall picture of the catastrophe that soon followed. These details about the Titanic's mechanical problems were not merely technical notes. They were harbingers of the impending tragedy, of which Rose was one of the few witnesses. As the Titanic relentlessly plowed through the dark waters of the Atlantic, the final days Rose and Jack spent aboard were filled with deep personal drama intertwined with the looming catastrophe. Rose shared these moments with James, each detail of her narrative painting a picture of past love and impending tragedy. It was a chilly night, but the stars shone so brightly it seemed you could reach out and touch them, Rose began. Jack took my hand and led me to the deserted deck. There, under the shimmer of thousands of stars, he invited me to dance. There was no music but the whisper of the wind and the rhythmic thrum of the ship's engines. Yet we danced. That dance became our world, a small sanctuary from everything else. The day after our dance, Jack showed me a special place on the ship that few passengers ever visited, Rose continued. It was a little nook behind one of the lifeboats where he led me to give me his drawing. It depicted the sea under moonlight, which he had started before we met, but finished knowing me. Now this place will be our secret, he said with a smile. That was the last drawing he made for me. The evening before the disaster, we spent looking out at the sea, Rose recounted with a deep sigh. Jack was pensive. He sensed something amiss. The sea holds many secrets, Rose, and I hope one day you'll tell the world our story, he said, gazing at the waters of the Atlantic. His words were prophetic, and I promised him that I would fulfill his wish. These memories were not just experiences for Rose, but the last vivid impressions of her time with Jack. They were filled with the warmth and bitterness of a farewell that both felt but could not fully comprehend. The day before the catastrophe, Jack surprised me. Her voice trembled with the warmth of those words. He used a piece of coal and wrote our meeting date on the back of one of the lifeboats. This way, our love will stay here forever, he said. I never told anyone. No one knew about our little secret. When the night of the collision came, we felt a slight jolt, Rose continued. Many didn't notice it, but Jack immediately knew something serious had happened. We quickly dressed and went out onto the deck. The cold was piercing, and there was a sense of impending doom in the air. Describing the subsequent events, Rose emphasized the chaos and rush during the evacuation. People were running to the lifeboats, screaming, crying. Jack was helping the elderly and children, while I tried not to lose sight of him. At that moment, I realized that love can manifest as self-sacrifice. James recorded every word, feeling the weight of each one. These stories not only provided him with material for his research, but also helped him to understand Rose, her feelings, and fears on that dreadful night. Recalling the tragic night, Rose described the last hours on the Titanic with deep emotion. When the Titanic began to sink, Jack and I found ourselves in the water, clinging to the wreckage, she told James. They both floated in the icy water, holding onto the edge of an overturned lifeboat. Jack looked at me, his eyes full of love and concern. Rose continued, her voice filled with sorrow. He told me that his main task was to ensure that I survived. Promise me that you'll fight for your life, that you'll breathe for both of us, he insisted, knowing his strength was fading. These were the last words Rose heard from Jack before the cold water took him forever. After he was gone, it felt like the world had stopped. Rose described the feeling of immense emptiness after losing Jack. She was saved by one of the lifeboats that returned for survivors, but her emotional wounds remained unhealed for many years. Every day without Jack was a challenge. I learned to live again, each step filled with memories of him. Returning to life after losing Jack was excruciating for Rose. I lost a part of myself that night. For many years, I struggled with guilt for having survived, she admitted. Rose sought comfort in art, painting scenes of the sea and ships that symbolized her loss and dreams. Every painting, every stroke was a way for me to preserve the memory of Jack, our love, that night. Rose showed James one of her works, depicting a man standing at the helm of a ship facing the sunrise. This is Jack, as I remember him, and keep him in my heart. In concluding her story, Rose expressed hope that her story would help others cherish every moment of life. We don't know what tomorrow will bring, so we must live today, she said, looking out to sea as if seeing through time and space. This narrative not only shed light on Rose's personal experiences after the disaster, but also highlighted the deep tragedy she endured while maintaining hope and striving to live despite everything. After deep conversations about the past, Rose invited James to a small room she used as a personal memorial to Titanic and Jack. The walls were adorned with various artifacts and photographs, but one object caught James's attention more than others: a vintage wooden plaque with an engraved inscription that seemed surprisingly modern. Love deeply, dream boldly, live in the moment. These are Jack's words, Rose said, following James's gaze. He told them to me once as we watched the sunset over the ocean. It was so inspiring that I promised myself never to forget those words and that moment. Rose slowly sat down on a chair by the window, where the sunlight caressed her face, casting a silver glow in her gray hair. After the disaster, these words became my creed. I lost Jack, but his spirit continued to inspire me every day. It wasn't easy, you know. Life after the Titanic was filled with pain and sorrow. I often caught myself thinking that my soul had gone with him into the cold depths of the ocean. She paused, taking a deep breath. But I knew I had to keep living, not just for myself, but for all those who perished that night. I began to write, to paint, to engage in charity work. My life turned into an effort to convey to the world the stories of those who couldn't tell them themselves. Each of my paintings, every story, is not just a way to preserve memory, it's a way to cope with loss, to learn to cherish every moment, she continued, her eyes alight with a quiet fire. I hope my efforts will help others see the beauty and fragility of life, teaching them to carefully cherish each day. James was moved by her words. Rose had transformed her grief into art and assistance for others, making her story a lesson for all who face difficulties. Jack taught me to see the world through eyes full of love and hope. Love deeply, dream boldly, live in the moment. I repeat these words every morning. They remind me that life is a gift that should not be taken for granted, Rose concluded, smiling through tears. As James left her home, he knew that his work was more than just academic research. It was an attempt to preserve human history in its most vivid and painful manifestations. Rose's story, her words, and that old plaque remained with him as a reminder of the strength of spirit and the eternity of true love.